Hello, everybody. My guest today is Wendy D'Andrea, who I've been dying to have a conversation with for a long time, other than the things we have conversations about in the course of doing our work. She is the Chief Scientific Officer for the Trauma Research Foundation, which is how we met, and also an associate professor at the New School. So, an unusual person for me to hang out and converse with because because although you're trained as a clinician, you are primarily a researcher and a researcher on the topic of trauma, which is
That's
not
right.
an easy topic to research.
Yes, and it requires bringing that clinical sensibility and that clinical way of walking in the world with me everywhere.
Right, right, absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, you would have to do research as as faculty at the New School, but this is an area that I think is such a great opportunity because you've been talking about getting therapists more involved in research and researchers more involved with therapists,
hmm
which is a very kind of revolutionary idea.
Yes. So when we embark on this narrative of the clinician researcher divide, there's one level of that narrative that starts with who really has access to knowledge and whose way of knowing is superior. But if you start to peel back those layers, you hear a lot of regard for the other side. And you also hear a lot of awe. And you also, like any conversation that starts at a level of dismissal, you also hear a lot of insecurity and insecurity that what the researchers do doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. And what the clinicians do is just a drop in the bucket relative to the large scale impact that researchers may make. And so that's some of where that conversation, I think, can go awry, is that balance between who really knows and who really doesn't. So I think that there's so much potential in what could happen when we bring those two groups together. And I think there's also something deeply, I think we've kind of fundamentally misjudged how we should set up the training of clinicians in order for them to have maximum clinical impact in the field. Um,
Opposed to impact one person at a time.
Well, I think impacting one person at a time is brilliant and beautiful and wonderful. I'm never gonna, I'm never gonna dismiss that. Truly impacting one person is like, that's great. If that's all you do in your life, wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. You've lived a good life. But, I was teaching in part of my trauma seminar, which I was teaching to senior undergraduates this morning. We paused the class to stop and go over career trajectories. And we were going over the sort of canonical pathways in mental health, where the way it's often laid out is that doctoral level people generate knowledge, and master's level clinicians, who make up the bulk of the field, are supposed to just apply the knowledge that doctoral level clinicians or doctoral trained people make. So you're just supposed to apply that knowledge. Just do what you're told. Right.
Really?
Yeah. So that's the
Nobody
notion,
told me
right? Well, you are a doctoral level person, right? Um, you are supposed to be a knowledge generating force in the field. And that's often, if you look at sort of guidebooks and how to make your choice about should you be a doctoral level person or a like a master's level clinician, the way that you're taught to make that decision is, do you want to make new knowledge, or do you want to jump right in and start to solve the problem? But master's level training doesn't necessarily do this work of deconstructing how the knowledge is made. And really basic fundamental training in deconstructing how knowledge is made is the same training that helps us deconstruct how we learned our gender norms, how we learned to accept our racial biases, how we learned to internalize shame, how we learned to hide our emotions. It's the same stuff that makes good therapy. And so, if clinicians at all levels are trained in how to think that way, that makes them phenomenal clinicians, and it helps them feed into the research process, and it makes for better knowledge at all levels. And if researchers were thinking in that way, of the not just like how are your numbers good or bad numbers,
Right.
but how are our defenses constructed, how are our psyches letting us see what's real or not letting us see what's real, but like how do we actually see the data that's in front of us or not see the data that's in front of us, the way a clinician looks at their client and they're like, I know you're not telling yourself the truth right now. That's the same problem we have with our data sometimes. So researchers need clinicians in order to know what is true in their data and what isn't. Uh,
Okay.
so yeah, I think the world would be much, I think what we would come up with as solutions would be much more fascinating if we hung out a lot more, and if we listened to each other, and if we were trained in just in closer proximity to one another.
Right. And the thing that's wild to me is that because, I went through a doctoral program, but the divide was there. So it was a
Oh,
clinical
right.
was a clinical program, but all the professors did research. And the message was very clear that the research was what was of value,
Oh, sure.
right?
You have to say you're going to be a researcher to get in the door, and then everyone knows once you're there, you can say
Well,
you
actually,
can let it down. Yeah, yeah.
in my program, you didn't have to say you were interested in
No,
research
okay. Yeah.
because it was a clinical program. So you, but, and we didn't do our doctoral dissertation research because we wanted to. We did it because we had to. So, I mean, even though I ended up loving my research, and even in the end, I sort of semi-loved writing a dissertation about it. Um, it wasn't one of the choices I made, which you can probably understand, is I made a choice to research something that my heart wasn't attached to.
Mhm.
Because everybody said if you try to research something that comes from the heart, you're going to end up brokenhearted.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
after and, so I very carefully picked a topic I was interested in, but it wasn't going to, hurt my being if it was rejected
Yeah.
or criticized or attacked in various ways.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
so it's hard. I actually loved what you said at the Boston Trauma Conference about getting therapists more involved in research. Because I think therapists, it's not that therapists never have questions. It's gratifying to therapists to hear that the research backs up what they do. And probably not so good if it doesn't. But I think the idea of encouraging therapists to embark on research or to suggest areas of study is a very cool thing.
Yeah, I think clinicians are so connected to what people are coming in with and struggling with, right? They're so attuned to I'll give you an example. And I may be a little bit delicate about this because it's not my data to share. A colleague of mine described to me once a study that she couldn't get published. They had done follow up from a randomized clinical trial of clients who were in um, had been in a specific type of well, maybe not widely practiced, but widely touted evidence-based treatment that reduces PTSD symptoms. So their follow-up was to just call the patients and say, is your life better? And people like, technically I have less PTSD, but my life's not better.
Right.
And they couldn't get it published. And so all the reasons that people's lives weren't better was that, they got 1 more hour a night of sleep. That's good. They had one less flashback a week. That's good. These are all good. It's incremental change, but they were still knee deep in shame. They still didn't know like how to hug their kids back. There was all this stuff that wasn't represented in the symptom set.
Right.
This was at the time, this was probably 15 years ago, so pre DSM-5. For context, that stuff wasn't so well incorporated in the DSM-4. But there was, so clinicians knew that long before that stuff arose on the scene. And that stuff often isn't incorporated into much of the research setting. Research chases a lot of trends and a lot of funding priorities. And there are some ways in which research is trying to shift how its priorities are set, but clinicians are very anchored. Clinicians have to deal with people who vote with their feet. Clients don't come back if it doesn't feel right. And
Absolutely.
so they are very quick learners in this way. There's very immediate feedback.
Right. It doesn't matter how evidence-based the treatment is. If the client will return for it, it's
Yeah.
it's moot.
Yeah. Data schmata.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Wow. It's, and the other thing about research, I mean, I love applying research to psychotherapy, but it's hard because, especially for master's level trained clinicians, I mean, I had all this academic background in reading research and critical thinking about research. So I can read a research, a report of research, and I can understand it, and I can take the pieces that are clinically significant out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But but it's not easy for therapists to do that.
No, and most researchers are not trained at all. That's not the audience we're writing for. That's not the training we have. That's just not at all how we're thinking about it. I mean, to me, like I had to go sort of through a process of like learning, and I came from a first gen background, so I come from a family of like farmers and truck drivers and line cooks, right? And so I had to learn an academic voice, and then like I went through an intentional process of unlearning an academic voice, so that people would know what I was talking about, because I want people to understand what I'm saying. Thinking about how to put your findings into language that is just accessible is not something that people do.
Well, that just
Um,
makes me think about a CE, webinar on interpreting research for the average clinician. Not a good idea?
it's a great idea. It's a great idea. Well, and like, I don't know, I tell this story sometimes in my classes. Like I remember being in, so like I said, I'm a first gen, so I have first gen college student. And I remember like for my first 3 years of grad school, just feeling so dumb in every seminar. And just sitting with that, like, just that embarrassment. And I remember this like light bulb going off in my third year, being like, it's a bad article. It's just a badly written article. It's not me. It's just bad. um, yeah. So I think learning that, like, no, it's just not well said. It's not, and it's not saying anything. It's just,
Right. Or it's certainly not saying anything that a clinician could make use of.
yeah, 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 yeah,
No.
yeah.
But there's
Um,
a lot out there that clinicians could make use of
oh,
if
absolutely.
they had some help in how to interpret.
I mean, I think there's so much out there that clinicians absolutely can make use of. And interestingly, most of it does not. Or maybe not, I don't want to say most of it, that's maybe an exaggeration, but much of it doesn't live in the clinical space at all. Like basic fundamental perception research about like what happens when you make eye contact. What do you do? Like Beatrice Beebe, who's an attachment researcher, like what happens when your face is super close versus when your face is far away. Like the visual perception people, like a colleague of mine, Arian Mack, who she's retired now. She's 95, I think now. It might be maybe even in a bit senior to that even, who like discovered the brain process when like your brain just like blinks and misses information and how that works. Super relevant for clinicians. Or my other colleague Bill Hurst, who discovered the process called retrieval induced forgetting, socially shared retrieval induced forgetting, where you if you're like telling a story to someone and they just pretend you're not talking to them, you won't remember the story later. Yeah,
Wow.
right? Super important for family dynamics, but that's not in the clinical literature. He's a cognitive psychologist. So is Arian. She's a visual perception researcher. But a lot of the coolest stuff doesn't come from clinical psychologists.
Right, right, right. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll have to think about this webinar.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it would be wonderful if therapists had a place to suggest topics where that they need research on.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody wrote me recently, emailed me, someone I've never met, emailed me to say, I'm interested in your research on the effects of narcissistic personality disorder on shame.
Oh,
Meaning relationships with someone with narcissistic personality disorder on the degree of shame felt by the subject. And I had to say, I I have not seen any research on that topic. I think it would be I think it would be so hard to get subjects. And that's something else that therapists may not understand or clients may not understand is how would you find subjects? Because I'm not going to,
hmm.
right? And then how do you determine if their definition of narcissist, let's say we got, 50 shame subjects, but their descriptions of the quote unquote narcissistic personality symptoms of their exes were all different. You know,
Hmm. Mm,
because some
mm-hmm.
people use the term narcissistic to mean self-involved. Some people use it to mean, um, you know, angry, aggrandizing,
Mm-hmm.
the DSM definition of
Mm-hmm.
personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I think it's would be helpful for clinicians to understand that it's not easy to research some of the topics that might be close to the clinical heart.
Yes, I think it's a long, slow process. Each publication represents like hundreds of hours of multiple people's effort.
Yeah.
Um, and so we do, given the needs that are out there across the multiple communities that need to be served, it really does require a strategic and economical approach so that our resources are well used. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's difficult. I actually have a research or a pilot study of my therapeutic approach called TIST happening in Norway
Uh-huh.
at, at a very famous in Norway, very famous psychiatric hospital, Modum Bad, where just very conveniently, they're the patients who come to their trauma program, all their programs, but in this case, the trauma program, first of all, have all been screened for post-traumatic symptoms, and they come for 12-week stays, all paid for by the government of Norway.
That's not how it is in the US.
Like you would never, ever, 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 ever find that or anything close to it in the
No,
U.
we just have jail. Yeah.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I I used to do a lot of training in Norway. So I trained most of the clinicians
Oh, cool.
working with these patients um, in in my model years ago.
Hmm. What
So
are you doing? How are you approaching the research parts of it?
so so they're doing pre and post testing with a, the 12-week group.
Hmm.
And what's I think really helpful is that the the kind of the focus is a psychoeducational group, but what they learn about the model in this psychoeducational group is then applied in all their other groups.
That's nice. So it's reinforced and amplified.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
that's neat.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I am so lucky because most therapists could not afford. I mean, this is, you know, I don't need to put in any money. People are already trained. I just have to
Hmm.
supervise them. The patients are there. It's it's a group that only gets what the program gives them. So
Yeah, yeah.
it's very special. We couldn't recreate that in the US. I cannot imagine.
So are you primarily looking at like PTSD symptom change, or what outcomes are you
So
primarily?
we're
I
looking.
don't, and you, and I understand sometimes you want to wait until you have your debut, but
Yeah. No, what we're looking um, for affect regulation,
okay.
for what else are we looking at? I'm trying to remember the scales that we're using. Since I'm
The
not
the
a
the DERS or the IASC are the
yeah,
ones, yeah.
right. The DERS, the Toronto alexithymia
Yes.
scale, um, and then there are a couple more that they usually use at the hospital.
Hmm. That's
And
super interesting.
so it will be very, very interesting.
It's nice that you have the alexithymia in there since so just for folks who are listening, alexithymia is the ability to articulate your emotions, and it's complicated because sometimes as you're going through therapy, if you can't articulate your emotions at the beginning, then you don't always report how bad things are because you can't articulate your emotions. So as you're going through the arc of therapy and you're going through a self-discovery process, then your emotions start to sound worse because you've learned how to articulate your emotions. Um, so it's interesting that you have that in there. You can kind of look at how that travels with your emotion regulation stuff.
And it's very interesting because this program has always a year and a half to 2 year waiting list. So people apply to the
Oh, so
program
the pre-screen is way out. Yeah.
and so they obviously really want to come.
Yeah.
Uh, but some of them get there and they can't participate. Either they're alexithymic or or they they fight with anything that's offered.
Sure.
Everything is wrong and bad. And
Yeah.
that's
Well, yeah, the build up after, if you're waiting for 2 years has got to be intense, right?
right, right. And luckily TIST simplifies all that. Like it it allows the therapist to work with both. And
Mm,
it's amazing.
How many different clinicians? Did you say there were 12 clinicians?
No, no, the groups, I think, are 12 weeks. I'm trying to
okay.
remember how many people. I think it might be 10 people, and there
Okay.
are probably 5 clinicians.
Okay. My little research brain learns about cohort effects and clinician effects and alliance effects and all of those other, like how different groups cohere with each other and all of that
Right,
stuff.
which all makes a difference. How
Yeah.
triggered they are by each other.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't give a perfect environment. You can't prescribe it.
Right, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Hmm.
So if therapists have an interest in a research project, how could they find researchers who might be interested in their topic? I guess
Um,
people could help.
so folks could write research at traumaresearchfoundation.org. And one of the things that we're working on is building a space for researchers and clinicians to come together and do more exchange. We don't have a general, I think you mentioned this before, sort of in this direction, like a general just ideas repository and ideas exchange place, which I think would be really cool. Just for even just researchers to start to like
Talk
be
to each other.
sensitized. Yeah, and for people to have this ideas exchange and start to think about what it is that clinicians are thinking about. I would love for that to be just a place for people to connect. But one of the things we're working on building is really an infrastructure so that people can come together and talk to each other, so that they build a common vocabulary for working together in a more sustained way, and building out a place where um, people who are doing interventions can connect with people who can help them evaluate those impacts. And so that's some stuff that we can start to do through that email that I just dropped of research at traumaresearchfoundation.org. And that's stuff I do with my lab as well, which is my last name plus a W, D'Andrea W at newschool.edu. So those are both places that folks can connect. I think otherwise there are places I'm trying to think of like how does one adopt a researcher? And where does
Hey,
one find
doctor
one?
researcher, yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like my suggestions here are a little like meh. They don't give the full I don't feel like they give the full experience that I would want to give people, which is sort of why we need to build it.
Right.
But of course, there are professional societies and all of these places that are designed for people to come together. There's ISTSS, there's our trauma conference, which happens every May. That's the Boston Trauma Conference that happens in Boston every May with the Trauma Research Foundation, and various other places like that that are meant to be places for information exchange and bridge building. There's SEPI, which is the Society for the something something psychotherapy integration, but it still doesn't. I sort of feel like none of them quite scratch the itch. And I
Right.
feel like the best stuff happens in the sort of into the interstitial space, in the casual conversation and across the dinner table. And so I think that's a lot of what we need to kind of be building, where we learn more about each other, and learn each other's priorities and interests.
So I know what I want. I want
Ah, it came back.
actually, this is a new thought.
Oh, okay.
You're the right person to ask it. So, a lot of clinicians, my thing is that that focusing trauma treatment on traumatic memory is a misunderstanding
Mm,
of what trauma survivors need, because because it doesn't focus on the effects of the events, it focuses on the events.
hmm
And so most therapists believe that there's research that proves that talking about traumatic events has positive benefits. And I thought, I don't know a single study.
Positive benefits, how?
Meaning reduction in symptoms.
What is often happening, I think the extrapolation that people are making there comes from the exposure therapy space, right? Where people describe the memory of the traumatic event. And the technique in exposure therapy in its purest form is to close one's eyes, describe in detail, first person, present tense. So I am in the traumatic space. I am seeing the thing happen now in front of me. The somatic experience of the trauma as it's happening in real time, with as much emotion and intensity as the person can, and to evoke the memory and experience as much as they can, and to do that over and over in a single session until they stop feeling that intensity. So first of all, you cannot disconnect the memory work from the bodily experience work in that. Now, in that space, is there symptom reduction as a result of prolonged exposure, as a treatment package as a whole for PTSD in particular? It's a very much a yes, but. So yes, but people are carefully screened on the way in, without kind of complicating comorbidities, without dissociation and dissociation, substance abuse, self-harm, hospitalization, borderline personality symptoms, the stuff.
Most people have.
The effect size, which is to say the magnitude of change, is quite small. And the lasting effect is really not terribly well sustained. So the short way of putting it is that if 100 people were to call to be in a PTSD study, got exposure therapy, and you measured them 6 months later, you might have 15 people who are kind of better.
Right.
So I don't know how much of that is memory work versus not.
Right. And I don't think of that as memory work. I mean, it is memory work. One of my clients who had prolonged exposure probably 15, 20 years ago said it was the most traumatic experience of her entire life. It was much worse than the trauma. So,
It's really intense, and I've never heard a good answer to, and I've heard an answer, but I don't buy it. First of all, from a biological perspective, exposure therapies like in animal models and stuff, you do not get sustained learning upon reintroduction of the traumatic stimulus if you do any sort of animal work. So you reintroduce the fear and the whole thing is right back. So I don't see. I've also never heard a parsimonious answer to the question of, what if the person has 5 traumas? Do you just do it over and over? And the exposure therapy answer is like, no, we expect the exposure to therapy to generalize to those. But I'm like, did you prove it? And that I have not seen a good answer to. So I don't,
and
if you,
my clients have had hundreds of traumatic events.
yes, absolutely. That is modal. That is typical.
Yeah.
When it rains, it pours.
When you grow up in a traumatic environment, you're exposed to a lot of trauma besides the events.
Yes, when your environment accepts you being treated like that, it allows people to be around who allow that kind of treatment, and it becomes saturated.
And you never know, is it going to be 5 minutes from now? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be Friday? They're living with the fear all the time.
Yep. This is what happened in I did a treatment study for my dissertation. I did not do the thing you said about doing something that wouldn't, I mean, it didn't wind up breaking my heart. Fortunately, it wound up being a really cool study. And I was very happy with it. But I got lucky. Yeah, the average number of traumatic exposures because we asked how many of these types of things did you experience? How old were you when it started? How old were you when it stopped? And did it happen daily, weekly, monthly? And yeah, people on average had like 3 to 500 types, or 3 to 500 exposures,
Right.
um, by
Right.
the age of 18. By the age of 18.
Right. Right. And you can't desensitize. I mean, can you imagine desensitizing even 50 events?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't line up for me, and I find it if yeah.
I find it disturbing myself. As a
Yeah.
non-researcher, I, as a clinician, I'm very disturbed by it. Um, and also it doesn't mimic, um, psychodynamic approaches in which the client tells the story to the therapist slash witness, which is different than prolonged exposure.
To me, the part that it's hard isn't so much what throws me. The part that it is devoid of relationality, um, is really what I really struggle with. So much of what's trauma. I mean, of course, there are traumas that are not relational, of course, and those matter too. But the fact that it doesn't deeply contemplate what it means to sit with someone who is experiencing this distress, and what it means to ask them to live with it and live with it in front of you, and bear and reveal it in front of you, and all of that, that it doesn't see the work from that angle is a lost opportunity, and sometimes I don't know who it's for.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. At least I read a doctoral dissertation a number of years ago,
Mm.
which studied clinicians trained in prolonged exposure. So they had a group of clinicians trained in prolonged exposure, a control group of clinicians not trained in prolonged exposure, and asked both groups, how often do you use prolonged exposure clinically? And and for both groups, the numbers were very low because the clinicians trained in prolonged exposure did not use it.
A big old nope.
Right, right, right. Which I'm not surprised.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we have to be hardcore about trauma therapy.
I think so too. And 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 I think this is part of this idea I'm having for a webinar on what therapists need to understand about research.
Yeah.
Is is just that kind of thing. It's like, you know, technically prolonged exposure has the best evidence base of any method around the world. But if you know how to read the research, it's actually not that great.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. This is my favorite thing to teach. So I haven't taught it for a bit because I have other things I'm teaching right now, but I teach a class on evidence-based treatment to doctoral students in their third and fourth year. And the whole thing is it's like research methods for treatment studies, and it's all deconstructing the evidence of evidence-based treatment, which is I'm at a program at the New School. We're a critical theory program on clinical psychology, basically. Very psychodynamically based, science oriented, psychodynamically oriented program, which is super cool. And so it's all about, like, do you know what this number means and what went into that number? And when you're told it's evidence based, is that good? Like, do you feel good about that, being given that stamp of approval? And did we follow even our own rules? And um Does the gold standard mean anything if you got 15 people out of 100 being kind of a little bit better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We
Yeah.
want, we want a little more than that.
Yeah, right. But I
Yeah.
think things are changing. I really do. I think the field, like right now, it's the as we're recording, it's International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies annual meeting. And even there, they've begun to which was like the hegemon of prolonged exposure for forever.
Right.
And they have finally begun to say, like, maybe we could do better. Maybe we need to develop new approaches. Maybe the fact that, like, people of color straight up say, I'm not coming in for that type of therapy. That sounds awful. maybe, maybe we should pay attention to their preferences. Um, that's Sierra Carter's work, who like has documented that like you tell Black people what exposure therapy is, and they're like, ew, no. Um, so if they don't want to do it, and you can't be like,
Right. But
I
it's,
guess, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. That's, that is great. Good for her. I'm glad she
Yeah,
did.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Wendy, this has been, I'm sure I'm going to think of a million other questions.
Well, we can do this again. We can
We
we
can
can
do
talk
it
all we
again.
want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I hope that people listening are getting a feel for the values and the pitfalls of research and what we need to look for.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really happy to be a resource and happy to yeah, happy to help people think about it it can be a better world. It can be an inspiring and exciting and fun thing, and we need inspired and inspiring fun people to do it. Otherwise, it'll just stay boring.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely. Right.
thank
It
you so much for having me. It was really, really fun to just get to be with you and think with you.
was great. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.